We've said from day one we didn't want to fill up the podcast with adverts, and we're not about to do that. However, podcasts do cost money to make, and thanks to our friends at Viking Covers, we're able to cover some of those. Their values are the same as ours, they're car enthusiasts, and they've got a real quality product we think you might be interested in. If you're looking for indoor or outdoor car covers for your vehicle, please go check them out at vikingcovers.co.uk. Now, over to the show.
Welcome to my dad's car. Enjoy!
Welcome to My Dad's Car, a podcast discussing our personal relationship with automotive nostalgia. And you know what? It doesn't even have to be about your dad's car. It can be your mum's, your grand's, your parents', guardians, or even a neighbour's. If it made an impression, let's talk about it. Hello Charlotte, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Hi Charlotte, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks.
So you guys sort of squeeze this in during lunch breaks and things like that?
Yeah, that's the plan. So yeah, I work in the automotive industry anyway. I'm a marketing manager for a car parts supplier. So I work from home 3 days a week. And yeah, this is my kind of lunch break, which normally ends up going a little bit over. But
we won't tell.
It goes either way. So yeah, I end up doing stuff for them. So yeah, we fit it into lunch and then I edit it in the evenings, and yeah, it stops me sitting there just playing on a phone and wasting my time.
Yeah.
So at least I've got something to show for my time. But yeah.
No, that's a good idea.
And then yeah, John's you do gardening and stuff, don't you, John? So work for yourself.
Yeah, I can't work from home at the moment, unfortunately. Yeah, so I usually do like a half day on a Friday. So basically I'll wrap it up and come do this with Andy, and then it's sort of school run time and kids stuff at the weekend.
Wow, nice and busy then.
Yeah.
So for the benefit of the tape, we're joined by Charlotte Vowden, who is an automotive journalist, writer, content creator, something along those lines. Is that how you'd describe yourself?
Yeah, I sort of say journalist, presenter.
Presenter as well, yeah.
Classic car adventurer, that kind of thing. Because I do broadcast and work for the BBC, so I do radio. I've done TV. I host events like the stage and stuff like that. I write, do podcasting a bit, so a bit of everything. So yeah, writer, presenter, classic car adventurer, hobbyist, whatever. So yeah, bit of everything.
Cool. So yeah, here you are. You've joined us, which is very kind of you to give us a little bit of your time. Without further ado, then, what's your earliest car memory?
I think I'm going to go a little bit against the grain here because my earliest sort of car memory is relatively unremarkable, and I was very, very, very young because it is of me sitting in a car seat screaming at my mum for more milk. And honestly, it's like I can even feel the emotion in there of me going, meh. So I must have been really, really young. And that is genuinely the first car memory I've got, is sitting in my car seat, screaming at my mum because I wanted more milk. And we had literally only reached the end of the road. So I was an absolute snack fiend back then. And I'm not sure what car. It might have been a Ford Sierra because we were a bit of a Ford family. So it might have been a Ford Sierra, but I have asked my mum and she can't remember what she was driving, because I think the sort of like aggressiveness of which I was shouting at her probably prevailed over anything else at the time. So that's sort of my earliest car memory. And there's not sort of too much detail I can go into about the vehicle itself, but going against the grain of my answer is that I think the most formative early car memory I've got is being in my Grandads Mk3 Ford Escort.
Okay.
And that was when I was a teenager, and he used to pick me up and take me to secondary school. And I would say a pretty rubbish time at secondary school. I got bullied quite a lot.
Oh dear.
And as I say, he would pick me up from school and we'd sit in the car, and it was this sort of sunburnt orange, all the interior was faded. But to me, getting in that car was so sort of, it was just transformative in the way that I felt, because it felt safe. And when I was out of the car, when you come out the school gates and someone throws the ball at your head and stuff like that, and getting in that Escort just meant safety, security, and my granddad was a huge man, very, very strong, very tall, and he'd sort of cup my right hand in his hands and just hold it, and it just made me feel so much better after having a rubbish day at school. That car was a place, it was a sanctuary for me. But I didn't really process it at the time. It was just like, okay, I'm in Grandad's car and he'll make me feel better. But it's as an adult looking back, when you think about how cars have had an impact on your life, and that's when I really realised that this old scruffy Ford Escort was really, really important.
Yeah.
And, he'd take me to the fish and chip shop and, be like, don't tell your dad that we're going to go and get fish and chips. And it was like a little secret place where we could just be together, and he'd just, comfort me and make me feel better. And I also got bullied about the car because, we didn't have lots of money when I was growing up, as most of us, don't. And people took the mickey out of the car, and that then meant they were taking the mickey out of me even more.
Yeah.
But I never looked on the car in a negative way, because when I got in it, you just feel your body relax. You're like, oh, I'm with Gramps now. And he had it because he was one of those people that kept cars going.
Okay.
When something went wrong, he'd fix it. And my dad's a mechanic, and he helped my granddad look after it. So, it sort of feeds into a lot of what I kind of believe in with cars now, is that we should try and keep them on the road for as long as we can.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's not all about looks, and anyone can love any car for any reason, and we should never look negatively on someone for their choice of car or how scruffy it is. You've got events like the Festival of the Unexceptional, which is like a pure celebration of all the sort of unsung heroes of the automotive world. And I love going to events like that. And in a way, I wonder whether that's because, I was in one of those cars when I was younger that was kind of like looked down upon and things like that. Whereas now we kind of celebrate them.
I was going to say, like on the subject of, well, I suppose unfashionable cars back then, that it was more of a thing, wasn't it then? But now I don't think necessarily it is. And it goes to show, if they've got events such as the one you've just mentioned, then it just proves that sort of thing has kind of come full circle, hasn't it?
Definitely. And I think it kind of feeds into like the British sense of humour. Like, we love an underdog.
Yeah.
And, generally we're quite good at taking the mickey out of ourselves. And I think that there is something in that when you look at those cars that sort of go to things like the Festival or the Unexceptional, where, it's kind of like we want to look after the ones that don't have a great time and that get forgotten about and sort of pushed to the sides of the car park, because they're not the shiny new cars. And I think that comes down to, our sense of humour, and we just don't take ourselves that seriously. We want to have a laugh.
I think there might even be a case of like the super duper impressive or so-called expensive impressive car now is probably a bit more embarrassing to turn up in something like that, in a way, isn't it? You'd kind of be pointed at, and I mean, it'd be nice to have the trouble of that and experience it. But,
Yeah, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm the same. I'd rather have something old and with character, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's funny to think that back in the day it was the other way around, whereas now maybe it's not.
Yeah, definitely. And we look on these survivors, and I hope and I wonder whether it's that society is coming back round to this idea of looking after things more and valuing something that's a little bit older, and the craftsmanship and the design that has gone into it. Because you look at a lot of the stuff on the road now, and it's all very similar. The design element for people has been taken out. I've spoken to designers at Ford before. They've had the Ford Capri and things like that, and the EV version. And for them, they're not designing cars anymore. They're designing products. And it's really sad when you speak to creative people who are having to put their creativity in the marketing box and go, okay, well, we need it to sell to this person or that person, because fundamentally that's what these businesses need to survive. It's all a bit sad when you look at the contemporary car market. I mean, other people will certainly have a different view of it because perhaps they're more interested in the technology, and it's not to say you can't have fun in an EV.
No.
But in terms of something that holds value both sentimentally but also in sort of preservation of history and things like that, that's where it is with classics.
Yeah. So if we go back to your grandfather's car, it was interesting you said that was a choice of his. To a certain extent, he wanted to keep that vehicle going, but was he one for kind of music in the car, or was he a smoker? Kind of put us in the. Would you sit in the front? Did you sit in the back? Was your grandma around? Like.
Yeah, so it was always just me and my gramps.
Okay.
He wasn't a smoker. I think he did dabble back in the day because he was actually a pig farmer. So he, before the Escort, was very much a tractor sort of van truck kind of man. So the Escort was one of the first sort of, I suppose, family cars that he'd bought.
Okay.
And as I say, I sort of had like kept it on the road, and it was just very tired in there. But he would be listening to the radio, always Radio 4, when I was sort of coming into the car. But as soon as I got in, he'd switch it off, and it was the sort of indication that all attention was on me.
Yeah.
Which sounds really like selfish and self-indulgent, but I think for him it was just he didn't want the radio to be background noise because he listened to a lot of talk radio, and he loved learning, and that was the way that he learned, was through the radio and through books. And so, you know, when he had a passenger in a car, you turned it off. It's quite traditional in that sense. So it was always, you know, just quiet and calm and a place of conversation. And I think that, you know, that goes for a lot of us when we're road tripping with someone else. It is a place for conversation. It is where those chats can take place because you're both looking in the same direction, and it takes away the intensity of something that might be quite awkward or quite personal to kind of converse about.
Yeah.
And it had that, it's so indescribable, isn't it? But just that old car smell.
Yeah.
You know, something really comforting about it. And the fact that the upholstery on the chairs was tatty, but like an old sofa, you'd sit in the passenger seat, and I know, you know, I was in the front seat next to him, and it just fit your body, you know, it just fit. Because it's had so many bottoms on it over the years that it's got that sort of low slung, you know, unintentionally so feel to it. And, you know, everything was faded, the plastic was cracking, and it was just a warrior, really, that it was still going. And you know, externally, it was this orange, you know, you look back and it was just so sunburned and so tired, but still going. And yeah, just a lot of affection for that car. And as I say, we were sort of a Ford family. My first car was a Ford Fiesta. My second car was a Ford Fiesta. And so I think it sort of feeds into that as well, like the fondness for the brand.
Can you remember what happened to the Escort?
It died a death. It had to go. Do you know what? So the number plate was B. I can't remember the numbers, but then the last three letters were ANY. And my nan used to say, you can be anything you want. And it came from the Escort's number plate, be any. And so that's a nice little memory I've got of it, as be anything you want. And I guess as well, like, you know, when you're at school, you're told you're put in a box by your peers. You know, you're the fat kid, you're the nerd, you're this, that, and the other. And because I was like really into rock music and stuff like that, you were immediately pushed to the side of what was cool at my school anyway. And so getting in this car with my granddad, who would make me feel like I could do anything, and the number plate was be anything. It all, you know, when you think about these things, it all just comes together to weave a really beautiful tapestry in terms of how a car can impact you and the way you grow up, the way you feel, the way you see cars, and the way that you interact with them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it did eventually went to the scrap heap, and he got a Skoda, which my dad then took over when he couldn't drive anymore because his sight got really bad, which was very sad. And when he lost his sight, he couldn't take me to school and pick me up from school anymore. And just before it went completely, he wrote a letter. And at the end of it, in the letter, he said, I will miss taking you to school. And he referenced that time that we spent together in the Escort and then the Skoda for a little while. And he referenced that, and he said, I'll miss our chats. And he said at the bottom of it, show them how it's done, my darling. He said, show them how it's done. And I got that tattooed on my wrist when I was 20.
That's nice.
And again, you know, that's all from that time spent in this Escort. I've got this beautiful handwritten letter. It's a bit scraggly because he was struggling to see. But the fact that this letter, which now influenced a tattoo that I've got, mentions the time that we had in their car, it was important to him as well as it was to me, which is really special. So even though the car went, the impact it had has endured, you know, through to the present day.
That's nice. I see a lot of kids being brought in. Well, not lots of kids, but you do see the odd kid being brought in by their grandparents, and sometimes it looks like it's a real chore for the grandparents. But it's nice to hear a story like that where it genuinely wasn't a chore, and obviously left a nice imprint on the pair of you.
Yeah, at the weekends my nan would then join us, so she would have stayed at home on the school run, but the weekends the three of us would go down to B's Caff, and it was a proper greasy spoon caff right underneath a block of flats in North London. And, Nan would let us have one bacon sandwich each, and I'd have a carton of Ribena. Gramps would have a cup of tea. And if she was in a good mood, she'd let us have another bacon sandwich. And it was, that proper cheap white bread, really salty bacon. And then we'd get back in the Escort and we'd drive into town, and I'd have my £3 pocket money that my nan would give me every week. And me and my nan would go shopping, and my Gramps would sit in the library, or he'd just sit in the Escort. He'd just sit in the Escort and listen to his radio. And he'd be in there for 2 hours sometimes, because if me and my nan got carried away in Woolworths, then, all bars are off. We're in there forever. And so, it was the school run car, but it was also the Saturday morning car, where every Saturday we'd go for a bacon sandwich and then get back in the car after shopping, and we'd go for a tea cake in another cafe. And it was just that. It was very mundane. It didn't do epic journeys. They never took it anywhere particularly special. It was just the day-to-day, taking me to school and going to the cafe and going to the shops at the weekend. It was a very normal car, but when you think about the times that you spend in it and where it took you and what that time that you had with those people, like my grandparents had a huge impact on my life generally, but specifically with their cars, because of, they sort of looked after me at the weekends and picked me up from school and stuff like that, because my dad was working, as a mobile mechanic, so he was really busy. So they kind of like took the baton on. And this Ford Escort was central to that time.
Did you have siblings, Charlotte? Or are you an only child?
Yeah, so I had an older brother, but he was a bit older, so he was like not really around, doing his own thing.
Yeah.
So it was kind of me and my grandparents. So I was very lucky that I was able to have that time with them, just the three of us, or just me and my gramps.
Yeah, I lived with my grandparents for 3 months or so. So my mum and my stepfather split up when I was just before I did my GCSEs. So the summer I did my GCSEs, I went to live with my grandparents, which was in the same town. But just to kind of spend that sort of quality time with a different generation, or kind of an older generation, just see how they do stuff. Obviously, they're living at a different pace of life, and they do the crossword in the evening and watch Countdown and all the rest. But you kind of just start learning a little bit more about them and just kind of what makes them tick. And it is really interesting. And also, kind of as a parent myself, it kind of makes you think about what you do, kind of bringing your children up, and kind of how you do those things, and maybe installs perhaps some older values to how you're living, rather than maybe if you hadn't spent that time with them. So obviously you mentioned the Sierra your parents were having. What was the first car maybe you remember your folks having?
The Sierra is the first one.
Okay.
But my dad, as I mentioned, he's a mobile mechanic, so what really made sort of the memories was the vans that he had.
Okay.
And I can't remember specific models and things like that, but there was one Mercedes he had in particular. And, like Mercedes was real posh, it wasn't the Ford Transit. This was a Mercedes.
Yeah.
And again, it was slightly burnt orange-ish. It was on the tired end of Mercedes vans that were available at the time. But because it had that badge on the grille, it was like, cool, Dad's got Mercedes. And I've got memories of him like in the summer where he'd come home from work and he'd be so hot. He'd been in his overalls all day. And he'd take his sort of shirt off and he'd had his jeans on. And he had these, again, very odd, remembering the detail, but these sort of red leather shoes that he'd change into as his sort of like Cas shoes. He's taken his steel toe cap boots off and he's put these Cas shoes on, and they kind of matched the red of the Mercedes van. And I remember that being parked outside the house and just thinking, what does he do all day with that thing? Because it was so huge. You've got the Sierra, but then you had this huge Mercedes van with all these tools in the back of it and things like that. And when you're young, you don't really, or I didn't question him about what he did in his day. He was just Dad. He went to work at 6:30 and came home sometime in the evening. And he had this big van for whatever he did. And I love practical vehicles, and I think it comes from that, sort of seeing these huge work vans that Dad's had over the years. And I used to make cakes for like his birthday cake, and it would be often shaped like the van he had at the time. So he had a white LDV at one point, and I've got a picture of me holding up this LDV shaped cake. It looked more like an ambulance, to be honest. But, I made an attempt because for him, these vehicles were super important. But he kept them, again, for a very long time. And so they became almost a member of the family, because it was like, it's like almost Postman Pat, you know, he goes off in his little van and does his thing, and he was known in the community because he fixed people's cars. And so he was almost like a Postman Pat figure in my head, because that was the only reference point I had to a man that went off in a van every day.
Yeah.
So, and obviously because the Mercedes was red, it was like, oh, right. So, and because people knew my dad, and they'd say, all right, Steve, and things like that. So, yeah, I think the vans that my dad had over the years were very impactful, and where I got a lot of memories from. And just things like, you know, sitting in the cab, and he'd have, you know, you get these huge vats of hand wash,
Yeah.
and you put it on
With like the grit in it.
Yeah, really gritty, really stinky. But as a child, because it had the pump on the top of it, irresistible. So I'd sit there and I'd go, and it, you know, in my hand, and then I'd be like,
Swarfiga, was it?
yeah.
Yeah, like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you'd be like, what do I do with this now? It's gross and it smells, and sort of wiping it on the seat, and he'd, you know, be like, what are you doing? But it's like, you know, you leave a child with a pump thing, then they're going to play with it. But just, you know, sitting in that cab, and there'd be a couple of cassettes there. You know, I remember the Top Gun soundtrack, like cassette tapes, super cool. And things like, you know, his lunchbox. And he'd have like a half-eaten sandwich in there, about 3 packets of half-eaten biscuits, and you know, and he'd go out, and he used to have like 2 full Englishes every single day when I was growing up.
Wow.
But because he was burning it all the time, and he'd have sandwiches, and he'd have biscuits, and he just, you know, and then he'd have like a satsuma that'd been there for like a month that would never get eaten. And it was just, I guess, an insight into, you know, a work van. You know, what happened in there. And he wasn't one of these scruffy people, you know, the stereotypical van drivers where they've got like newspapers down the windscreen and McDonald's wrappers and things like that. He was very tidy. If it kept it very tidy, and the back of his van was always very tidy. And then that led into the memory of, at the end of the week, there'd just be a pile of his overalls by the washing machine, and they were just really stinky, and he was like, ooh, you know, but not really understanding what Postman Pat did.
What was the do you know what was the attraction of Fords? Was that just the fact that your grandfather had one, that's why your parents bought them, or
Were you in Essex? Were you living in Essex?
So we didn't live in Essex. Do you know Enfield?
Yeah.
We lived near Enfield.
Okay.
But I think it was because they were seen as a very reliable brand. You know, it was quite a British sort of car, and my granddad was quite a traditional sort of person, and so it was a Ford because it was a British brand, and and you could fix them quite easily. You know, back then they were far more easy to fix than they are now.
Yeah.
And I think it just led into that, really. I don't think there was anything, you know, none of us worked at Ford or anything. There was no connection in that regard, but they were just sort of reliable cars, and I think to a degree quite cool ones. Not that we ever had a Capri or anything, but you know, they were, yeah, I don't think there was anything specific about it. It was just the cars that they chose.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that your dad's profession is the reason why you are into cars then, Charlotte? Or
No. So weirdly, so we used to go to car shows, we used to go to air shows, and you know, it'd be me, my nan, my gramps, and my dad, and I found them so boring. Oh my gosh. If there was a craft tent, that's where I'd be. If there was an ice cream van, that's where I'd be. I just wasn't interested growing up at all. I was like, I'm going to go off to London, because my gramps had said, you know, I really liked writing and think I was very creative. And my gramps said, you'll get a column in the Times, girl. And he said that to me in the Ford Escort. He said, you'll get a column in the Times. And I went on to spend a decade working at the Sunday Times, and we had no connection, anything like that. But you know what it's like, you graft for it.
wow.
So I went off and did London, you know, completely different to my gramps, to my dad. And then it was in 2017. So I came to this all quite late, that I became the custodian of my other grandfather's MGA Roadster.
Okay.
And that was a turning point.
So is that on your mother's side?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So it was my mum's dad, and it transformed my life irrevocably, personally, professionally, in every single way possible. So my mum's dad, who I call Dodo, so I'll probably say that quite a lot. So Dodo is my mum's dad, my granddad.
Yeah.
He bought this MGA Roadster in 1991.
Oh, wow.
And I was born in 1988. So I was 3 years old. And I've got photographs of me sitting in the car, looking over the side of the door when the roof was down. All of that kind of back catalogue of references that I don't actually remember much of. But that car had been in my life pretty much my entire life. And sadly, my gramps and my nana on my dad's side passed away relatively young. And my other grandparents lived a bit further away, so we didn't see them as much. But when I was older, I had a car and I could go and visit them myself. So I got a lot closer to Dodo, my mum's dad. And I had the privilege of getting to know him as an adult. And he died when he was 92 years old, and he was still driving this MG at the time. And in those last sort of 5 years of his life, we spent a lot of time together. I was still working in the city at the Sunday Times, and I'd drive up every week to stay over at his. We'd listen to records, we'd have dinner, and we'd just get to know each other. On a different level to being, it goes from being a grandchild to being a friend and a confidant, when you're older. And at the weekends, I'd visit him and we'd go out in the MG if it was a nice day. And it was just, I was always a passenger. I never drove it. I was always the passenger. It was like Lady Penelope and Parker, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And the car was a retirement present to himself, and he'd always coveted one because his older brother had an MG during the Second World War.
Okay.
He'd always wanted one, so he'd been able to achieve that. And for him, it was a place where he could be a bit naughty. It was a place for hijinks, He was a very well-to-do person. He had perfectly coiffed hair, always wore a shirt, always wore braces. And those sort of metal things that you put on your shirt sleeves to keep them...
Oh, cufflinks.
Yeah, but they're a band that go around your forearm.
Mm.
To sort of keep the sleeves not puffed up. He had all the accessories of a gentleman, But in this car, with the roof down, it would ruin his hair, and he didn't care. It was a real place of relief for him, where he could let out that wilder side, because he was very conservative and very just so. And he was also a tiny, tiny man. And, he's like just about see over the steering wheel kind of thing, because obviously the seats in an MGA are quite low.
Yeah.
So the sort of clearance over the steering wheel, you've got to be quite sort of taller to make it. And I'd sit in that car sometimes and think, I'm going to die.
Blimey.
Because he'd be putting his foot down. You're like, uh-oh. And then, we'd get home fine. And so I'd started to spend more time with him and that MG. And when he passed away, as I say, I became custodian, and I got it. I understood, because I got in that car and I had no idea how to drive it, which to some people will sound like an alien concept, because I knew how to drive cars that were manual. I know how the nuts and bolts of how to drive a car work. But as you guys will appreciate, and I'm sure people listening, is that every single different car, especially older ones, has a nuance to it. And I couldn't get the handbrake to release, because it's like a racing one. It's a very, very slight lift, click, drop. I just kept lifting, couldn't get it to, had to go and find a neighbour, they couldn't do it, and eventually managed to get that sort of, it's just a quick up and a drop. And I took the MG out. As I said, I've never driven it before. And I was in my sparkly sandals, my shorts, sunglasses on, roof down.
Nice.
Honestly, you couldn't make it up. About 20 minutes into it, heavens opened, hailstones. And and it's like, where has this come from? And I pulled into a services in Cambridgeshire.
Feels like something from a rom-com, doesn't it?
Oh, it was so embarrassing.
Jude Law pulls in.
Yeah, if only. I was a single gal at the time, so that would have been pretty sweet. And pulled into the services, found a corner, and I was struggling to put the soft top up. And luck would have it that two guys in their classic cars were on their way to something. They came over and were like, "You all right?" "No, not really." And they helped me put the roof up. And then they asked me where the windows were. And I was like, don't know. And they were at my granddad's house, because with the MG you have to take, like,
slot in.
Yeah. So they were back in the garage, and by this point the interior of the car was saturated with water. These beautiful leather seats with those sort of indentations where the stitching is, pooled with little puddles.
Okay.
And I limped the car home, and I got onto a roundabout and I couldn't get it into gear. I didn't know where the lights were. When it was just all the stupid mistakes you could make, I did it in that one drive.
Yeah.
And I got back to my granddad's house and I just thought, okay, I've got to respect this car.
Yeah.
And the process of learning how to look after it, how to drive it, it really made me feel empowered, because a lot of people, well, no one I knew my age had ever driven anything like that. And it sort of set me apart in a way. And I started writing about it for the Sunday Times, and things just went from there. And I think that was the thing. It just took that car and almost being frightened by it to learn that you've got to respect them. And once you respect them, they will give you so much back. And I've driven the car like thousands and thousands of miles, and on some really tough roads, in the UK, but also I drove it to Nordcapp last year. So that's the furthest point in mainland Europe you can reach in a car.
Okay.
It was 6,000 miles in 20 days with my dad.
Oh.
And yeah, so I say she's called Frisky because the number plate is FSK 302. And yeah, so that was my spark moment, is what I'd like to call it. It happened in 2017 on that first drive, and I just thought, I get it. And my job is telling stories, and I am constantly impressed, surprised, inspired by people that I meet, and the stories and the relationships that they have with their cars, whether that's one because they have got the mechanical and engineering know-how to restore a car, to keep a car on a road, or whether they enjoy it because it works and they just love taking it out and someone else does the mechanics on it. But it's such a privilege to meet so many people who are just incredible, and people don't realise they've got a story until you give them the opportunity to tell it. And I ask people about their car stories, and very much like you guys do, it can really change your day when you hear someone else's story, and it gives you the opportunity to reflect on something in a different way. And fundamentally, it's all because of a car. And that's not meaning to say that cars aren't important, like just a car, but it's that sort of the relationship between man, woman and machine that can be built up, particularly with historic cars, is that people worked in factories and put these cars together by hand, and that's really special. So in a roundabout way, yeah, I wasn't sort of interested growing up, but I've always been around it because my dad loved them and worked on them. But it was not until I experienced a spark moment for myself did I realise how important cars can really be.
Yeah. Have you kind of got your hands dirty since owning it? So your dad's sort of shown you the ropes, so to speak.
Yeah. It's been an interesting transformation in my practical level of skills, because my dad and I are very different people. I am much more emotional. My dad is, I call him the Tin Man sometimes. So working on the car together has actually, I would say, not improved our relationship, but developed our relationship in a way that I don't think would have happened had it not been for the MGA's presence.
Okay.
Because we have had to learn how to understand and appreciate each other's temperaments and the way that we work, because I knew very little about the mechanics of how a car works in terms of what's under the bonnet. I knew how to do the basics, the checks that you get taught when you learn to drive. And I've learned things as things have gone wrong over the years on my Fiestas and stuff like that. But This is a very different thing where, learning in detail how it works, and when a little bit more goes wrong, you get to know the car in a different way. And, I come from a journalistic background. I write stories, I do sort of radio, TV bits and pieces. And so that's what my skill set is. Whereas my dad, he's the mechanic. And working on the car together, as I say, we've had to understand how our processes are. And for example, like when he's trying to explain something, he starts at step 5.
Yeah.
Because he has forgotten what it's like to be at step one. He just takes it for granted because everyone he speaks to on a daily basis knows step 1 to 5. And it's when you get to 5 that you go into the nitty gritty of something that it gets more complicated. And so I've had to say to him, it's like, if I put you in front of a computer and said, you've got to write an article about this, you wouldn't know where to start. That's where I am with mechanics.
Yeah.
And it's been quite a beautiful thing, really, because we've got so much closer. And, you know, when there might be flashpoints in the early days of my dad getting annoyed because I didn't understand something, it doesn't happen anymore. But then I've also learned when something goes wrong, for example, when we're on a road trip, don't ask questions because my instinct... Questions. I want to know every single step of the thing.
Yeah.
And it took a time for me to sort of shut that down, because in that moment, my dad needs to concentrate. He doesn't necessarily know what the problem is, and he's doing the problem solving in his head. Whereas I'm standing there like, oh, what do you do now? What's that? What do you think it is? What could it be? And he's like, look, just back off. We'll go through it later. And so it's things like that where I have to switch myself off. But then he also has to sort of switch parts of his personality off because he's never worked with anyone before. So he's never had to explain anything to anyone. And it's brilliant because when we do road trips now, I think because we come from very different places and we've both got very different skill sets, we're not competing. So we don't argue anymore because I trust my dad to be making the right decisions with what he's doing, and he trusts me to do what I'm doing. So, for example, when we did this trip last year to Nordcapp, we'd allocated around 3 weeks to do it. And the goal was to drive to Nordcapp, so North Cape in Norway, and scatter some of Dodo, my late grandfather's ashes, which is effectively at the top of the world. You know, it's the furthest point that I could take his car in mainland Europe.
Yeah.
And Dad sort of prepares the car. I help him where I can. I do what I'm told. We do the checks. We do the oil changes. You know, we go through an inventory of spare parts that we might need. You know, we work on that stuff together. And then when things are going, you know, every day on the road, we both have a set of checks that we're in charge of. At the start of the day, at the end of the day, we tidy the car, we prep the car, we lock the car. You know, we have our roles. And because we've got different roles, there's no flashpoints because you're not sort of saying, I know better. We've got ourselves established. And then I do the logistics. So I'm looking at routes, I'm looking at accommodation, and we don't book anything before we depart. We book every single day as we're on the road.
Oh, okay.
Because you don't know, you might see something and spend longer there, something might go wrong with the car. So they're very free-spirited trips. And my dad trusts me to find somewhere to stay that is suitable.
Yeah.
And if I can't, he knows I've done my best. And so he wouldn't get annoyed. And we've got thermal overalls in the car with hoods so that if we ever got to the point, you know, when we were in Norway, it's very remote in some places. If we didn't have anywhere to sleep, we can just sleep in the car. Not saying it would be enjoyable, but we've got the plan B.
Yeah.
And we're both very organised people. You know, the car it's HQ, it's mission control. In each door, we've got head torch each side. We've got a fire extinguisher each side, so that if there is an emergency, both of us have essential kit to get out and do what we might need to do. And it's really cool to have become such a team with my dad. You know, we spent 20 days on the road together in a 1960 MG, and we had one argument. And that was just over something. It was like really stupid. It was like I was in the bathroom, he was telling me to hurry up. That was it.
Yeah.
And it was just tempers flared because we were both shattered. This was like day, I don't know, 16 or 17 or something. And we were just really tired. And afterwards we were like...
I thought you were going to say you wanted more milk again.
Yeah. Imagine, no, it'd have been gin at this age. It's gin now.
Yeah.
But not driving, of course. And yeah, and that was the one thing we argued about in 20 days, you know. And on the first day of that trip, you know, these cars know. So, you know, my dad has prepared the MG within a nth degree of its life, you know. Day one, it lost half a litre of oil out of the rear main. And we were just like, no, you know, because that is a lot of oil to lose. And where it was leaking, it's flicking onto the clutch. And this is day one. And it was pretty fraught. And it was one of those situations where I'm like, is this trip over? What's going to happen? Is there anything we can... And I had to just keep it zipped and just left it to settle overnight, topped it up with oil. And I think we had 6 litres of oil with us, which should have been well enough to see the trip. But at the rate of loss and how far we had to travel, we wouldn't get to Nordcapp. And obviously you've then got the issue of component wear, component fail because there's no oil. So it's not a good thing to be doing.
No.
Thankfully, the rate of loss lessened as we got out of Central Europe because it was less hot. So viscosity is stickier, so it doesn't come out as quickly. And, we managed to accomplish the trip sort of safely, because you have to make difficult calls sometimes, and you've got this goal to get to Nordcapp. On the first day, you lose half a litre of oil out the back of the engine. Great. These cars do know how to add a bit of jeopardy to a scenario sometimes, but it was so frustrating because we'd done everything to prepare this car, and you can't foresee that. You just can't foresee that. And we didn't argue. We just sort of came together over the issue and just made decisions. And we're like, if this happens, then we can get traded, or we can go from here, we can get a ferry back from the Hook of Holland. And, you just get into the logistics of it. So you try to take the emotion out and you put the more practical approach back into it. But I mean, that car is just one of the best things that's ever happened to me, really. It's amazing. And I always think of my granddad whenever I've got his little photograph taped to the windscreen. It's all tatty and stuff now.
Nice.
But he's always there. He's like on the shoulder. And my dad and I have done some incredible drives in it, raising money for like the blood bikers. We did 2,000 miles in 46 hours and 59 minutes.
Wow.
Non-stop, apart from swapping. So we've pushed the car because it's a privilege, and I want to do something purposeful with it. So if I can raise money for charity or, share the experience with other people, then I will do.
It's interesting, isn't it, that obviously the tragedy of losing your grandfather kind of pushes you to do that. And it's similar for me, for example. I lost my dad 8 years ago, probably, but I've done so much since that happened that it's kind of pushed me to do various things, including the podcast. And yeah, I wouldn't have been doing that if I hadn't have lost him. Obviously, you wouldn't go back to that situation. You don't want to kind of get rid of someone, but it's because of that, and you've had to deal with it in a certain way, and it's just inspired you and it's kind of given you that kick, which is like, yeah, I'm really going to do this. And you kind of do that, and half of you is doing that for them because you think, actually, yeah, I'd have loved to have done that with them. So yeah, like your grandfather in spirit is kind of riding along with you on that trip.
Yeah.
Well, very much so, in a jar by the sounds of things. But
sandwich bag. He was in a sandwich bag on that one.
But yeah, there's a bit of you which is like, yeah, we're doing this for you. And I live in a similar way. I kind of do things because I think, yeah, that would have been something I would have wanted to do with my dad. Or yeah, if that opportunity came up, he'd have said yes. So it's
Was he very formative to your passion for cars?
Yeah, so kind of very quick background. Yeah, he was a car trimmer, like automotive upholstery. So I didn't grow up living with him, but I'd go up and see him every few weeks. And he had kind of classic cars. So as a child, he had an E-Type when I was about 8 or 9. So we spent quite a bit of time in that. He had a Daimler V8, like a Mark II Jag. We had kind of a various number of cars which he'd borrow from a friend who used to import them from the States, and he'd sell them on his behalf. And then whatever he was working on, whether that was kind of a Caterham 7 or a Ferrari or whatnot, if it was kind of available, he lived in a flat above his workshop. So we'd go there, and that'd be literally the first thing I'd do, straight in the workshop. And like, if there was an opportunity, I was like, "Oh, can we take that one out?" And he'd agree that, "Oh yeah, I'll just go and turn it round or something." And we'd just whiz it round obviously I had trade plates and all the rest, but yeah, we'd go and whiz it around the block, and he'd give me a run in it. So yeah, he's probably the reason that I'm kind of wired this way.
How about you, John?
I wouldn't say my dad was sort of like a petrol head. He used to take me to car shows, that sort of thing, but it was probably more of a similar story to your grandfather with the Escort, really. I just used to spend all my time in the car, school runs, and we used to own a sweet shop, so we used to go to the cash and carry, and I'd jump in, Yeah, we were lucky that he had a Mercedes back in the day when a Merc was a Merc, so it was quite a privilege to sit in the back of that and roll around with my brother, and yeah, just a lot of memories of that car, really. I think it's probably a case of, if I could get my hands on a classic and space for a classic, that would be the one that I would probably try and get my hands on. But yeah, as Andy often says, it's one of those ones of do you want to meet your heroes sort of thing. But it'd be nice to have the choice.
It's a risk, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. But at least it's achievable. It's not like it's an E-type, which isn't necessarily achievable.
Yeah.
So yeah, different sort of backgrounds really in terms of why we're into cars, but we are, aren't we? We are where we are, I suppose.
Yeah, we all find our way here somehow. Like I've just finished writing an article and I've mentioned my spark moment, and I've approached different people from within the industry and asked them to share their ideas on how we can create spark moments for the next generation.
Yeah.
Because we had relatively analog childhoods and we entertained ourselves. It was channels 1 to 4. There were my dad had the first mobile phone. It was like a car battery size battery with a receiver on the end of it. I remember, and he drove over that in his Mercedes van, and it survived.
Wow.
So that just gives you an indication of how substantial the original mobile phones were.
Yeah.
But our upbringings, we had more time, I think, to spend with people, and so things like going for journeys in cars were much more of an occasion. Whereas now, if a kid's in a car, potentially they might be looking at an iPad or an iPhone or something else to keep them entertained, because the journey itself isn't entertainment. And I remember as a kid going to Dodo in my nana's house. We were in North London and they lived in Cambridgeshire. And so it was like, I don't know, a 50-minute car ride. And it felt like days, and we didn't get, I'm sure we were given toys and things to keep us entertained, but I do remember just being fascinated by how far we were going. As the crow flies, it's not that far, but as a small kid, the journey was entertaining, especially when you came home at night. It was dark and it was just, I remember, it's a strange memory to have, but going along the A10, and they used to burn, they still do, rubbish underground, and you'd have like a funnel coming out with a blue flame. And I always remember seeing that, and it was a beaker that represented the fact that we were getting near home. Was seeing this burning trash flame coming out of the ground. And as I say, nowadays, car journeys, I think, to younger people, it's not so much of a treat. It's not a thing. It's like you get in the car because you're going somewhere to do something else, and that's what you're focused on. And the experience of a car, they're far more integrated with things like telephones and stuff like that. And so there's a lot more distraction in them. I do review a few EVs. It's more to sort of keep the cash flow coming in than a passion. But, freelance, you've got to diversify a little bit. And I think as well, it's good to drive these cars so you can have an informed opinion, because I think if you just say, no, I don't like it, basing it on no experience whatsoever, then you're kind of on the back foot. Whereas if you can drive them and actually say, this is why, it puts you in that stronger position.
I suppose, like, in terms of a spark moment with young people now, like back in the day for us, all cars had different engine notes and smells. Whereas now, kids playing off, that makes a nice word, doesn't it? That Tesla. Or it's hard to see how you can get the spark now, isn't it? With modern vehicles, I think. Well, to be honest, I think that the high performance cars all seem to sound very similar as well now, really. But yeah, I suppose when we were younger, we had, real cars. We had toy cars we used to play with. I don't know if kids play with cars anymore. My daughters certainly don't. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it evolves with the next generation of petrol heads, EV heads.
Yeah, EV heads.
The car journey is interesting. Like, we brought our two up very much tech free. They're not on tablets, etc. I was chatting to my wife about this the other day because the kids were talking about it, and it was like, actually, at no point does a child go or a baby go, I want my tablet. That's a parental instigation. At some point, the parent's gone, here's a device because I want peace and quiet.
Yeah.
And at that moment, you dig a hole for yourself, and then the child becomes reliant on it. Like, we did a journey up to Herefordshire a few months back, and my wife's got a stitch counter because she does crochet, and the kids sat in the back and they counted minis, and we counted like 300 or 400. We did go past the dealership.
It's cheating, isn't it?
We counted 300 or 400 minis on the way up, and they had a whale of a time counting minis.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've not got to give your kids Peppa Pig. Like, we're in control of that. Sometimes, you can think, well, it would be great if you just were quiet because I want to do this. But the seed you sow is that, your kid won't go anywhere without that entertainment.
Yeah.
And then that then leads into adults or young adults who always need that stimulus because they can't be on their own or
Yeah.
they can't do those sort of things. The other thing I was going to say is I've got recollections of being a child. You know, just the 30 seconds or the 10 seconds you wake up as your car pulls onto the drive, and there's kind of just the engine note changes. Maybe there's a slight chill in the air because someone's opened the door, or just the vibration stops, and you're like, oh, we're home. And then you've got to get upstairs and go to bed or whatever it is. And yeah, I can't kind of put my finger on exactly what that is. But yeah, I remember that as a kid, kind of traveling.
Yeah. It reminded me, so when my mum and dad split up, I didn't see my mum for a little while. And then when I started to see her again and I'd visit her house, on the drive home from her house to my dad's house, I'd always make her go the longer way because in the car, you'd get more time with each other.
Okay, yeah.
So again, that's reminded me of that. It's the journey, isn't it? It wasn't,
Yeah.
And it would have been 5 minutes difference taking a different road and just so that we could have a little bit longer together because I was going back to my dad's and, you know, you're just eking that time that you've got out. And that was in a Ford. That was in a Ford as well. That was another Escort.
Okay.
So yeah, they've been Ford has been quite formative in the car thing. But like, sort of with the spark moment subject, I sort of spoke to various people, and there's sort of incentives out there and sort of programs and schemes to try and encourage the younger generation into automotive, whether that's as a career or just as an enjoyment thing. So you've got like Hero Era, they do rallies.
Okay.
And they launched something called Rally for the Ages. I think it was about 3 years ago. And if the combined age of the driver and the co-pilot who would be doing the navigating on the regulatory rally was less than 70, you got free entry. And they've had kids young as 12 on the winners podium.
Oh, brilliant.
Nice.
Because, you know, a lot of this is about cost.
Yeah.
Cars are expensive and insurance is really expensive. And so it's trying to find entry points where it makes it more accessible and more achievable for young people. But also, like speaking to the British Motor Museum, you know, having different open days and doing exhibitions that look at art, automotive art. You know, me as a little girl, I might have gone to the British Motor Museum and been like, oh, boring, because my dad's got his head in another engine. But if there was an exhibition that showed me artwork as a creative kid, that might have been my spark moment. Because I think, you know, I've come into the space, I suppose, from a different perspective. And I see the car as like the center of the universe. But if you're looking at it from a career point of view, you could be the person that, you know, you could be an artist that focuses on cars. And that could be anything from traditional mediums to graphic design to all of that kind of thing. You could be someone that makes sculptures. You could be someone that does the engineering. You could do the colours of paint. I mean, that in itself is a career because nowadays the nuance of like blending these colours for bespoke vehicles and stuff like that. You could be someone that writes about cars. You could be a videographer. You could be someone that designs road trips. You know, there's so much potential around this object for an incredible life, incredible opportunities. But it's just getting that interaction with young people and the car. Like there's a charity called Starter Motor that are based at Bicester Motion, and their focus is exactly that.
We had we recorded with Gracie from Starter Motor
Oh, she is amazing.
a few weeks ago, didn't we? Yeah, I've not edited it yet, but yeah, we've had her on.
She's brilliant. She's like hope for us yet. That is what she represents. I was on a road trip with her last week in Wales, and we got stuck in a flash flood, and we were in a pub eating crisps and pork scratchings this time last week.
Amazing.
Together. She is incredible. She's so passionate, so impressive, and just the best kind of advocate that you would want for the car scene, both in, you know, getting careers, but also just getting people passionate about it. You know, we need more people like Gracie. She's so cool. Yeah, massive fan of Gracie.
I'd love to do, I've kind of organised events, not to the scale, but I'd love to do a car show that is for children and kind of talking about the museums and things. If you went to Bewley, for argument's sake, and as your child walked through the door, they gave them a digital camera and basically said, take 10 photos of the museum and then kind of bring them back. Or maybe if they set up drawing stations in front of particular cars and said, look, stop here and do this. And actually, maybe there's children's days in those places where it's not a sea of adults and they become almost a nuisance in that environment. Actually, that the whole thing is targeted at, yeah, you take your time here. If you want to sit and draw this car, you do it.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that, oh, you're going to get in the way of an old man who's seen this car 10 times before, but he's just kind of luring after it. Yeah, you enjoy the fact that it's got this mixture of chrome, or it's got wheels which don't have wheel bolts, or they're made of wood, or whatever it might be. And also the idea of explaining how they work, the basics of that physics, of how does it work, why does it stop, the sciences which are involved with that. And I think that would be interesting to be taught at a school level, kind of start these kids at 5, 10 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be super cool. And I think as well, this is something that I'm really passionate about, is supporting more sort of backing on sustainable fuel. Because I think, having interviewed a lot of people over the years who have got children, a significant number of them say that their children, if they have them, see the classic car as dirty. And they're like, oh, it's dirty, it's polluting, da 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 da. And it's like, you know, us within the world, we know that the carbon footprint for many of the classic vehicles, potentially not the modern classics, but, you know, a lot of the classics and historics, the carbon footprint in their manufacture has been spent. The way that they are kept on the road is using old parts, or, you know, new old parts and things like that. And they are an example of sustainability at its finest.
It's recycling, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But the problem we've got is that they are running on fossil fuel. EV is not the green alternative. There is no way, I don't think that you can argue that it is, because of the way that they're manufactured, and the battery is, you know, all things in mind and things like that. So I am really keen to encourage people to look into sustainable fuel as an alternative. Now, there are obviously problems such as availability and cost. But the only way that those two things are going to change is that if people learn about it, and if they think that it is based on the information that we have access to, if they think it's a good option, then they speak to their local MP and they get behind it. Because if it gets support and legislation, it gets investment, the price comes down, and it can be put into any forecourt tomorrow.
It's a bit like the adoption of organic food, isn't it? If you go back kind of 15, 20 years ago, that was, I guess, maybe reserved for health food shops, or the kind of the very wealthy.
Yeah, fancy people who live in London.
Why am I going to buy this organic, or why am I going to buy a free range one of these? Because I can buy a blue stripe version for 20 pence.
Yeah.
And actually, it's not just about the 20 pence you're spending there. It's the good that you're doing, or the fact that you're backing British farmers, or all those sort of things, rather than just, saving the money at the wallet. And how many people in classic cars, especially now, would be like, okay, yeah, we've spent £2 a litre or whatever it is on fuel in the past 5 years. If it went back to £2 a litre, but it was sustainable, would you swallow it? Or would you pay an extra 20p a litre at the moment to go, okay, yeah, this is actually doing some good. We can hold our heads up high going, yeah, actually, we're now doing a better job than everyone else buying E5, E10 out the pump.
It's interesting because I mentioned before that I want to use my Grandads MGA with purpose, and all my road trips have a meaning. And so this year's I do a big expedition every year. Last year was Nordcapp. This year, because I'm pregnant, it was slightly, less mileage and less ambitious. But before I knew I was expecting, I'd organised to do a road test of sustainable fuel. So I approached Corriton, and their sub-brand Sustain produce sustainable fuels for motorsport and classic vehicles. And so I used a blend called Classic Super 80. And they don't like the term drop-in solution because it's a lot more scientific and complex than that. But it is a drop-in solution. You can put the fuel straight into the car and drive away.
Yep.
So I decided that 1,000 miles was a nice, neat number to do a test run with the fuel. I started in central London and finished in Edinburgh. And that follows the 1,000-mile trial that happened 120 years ago, when they tried to prove that cars could make that distance.
Okay.
And so they didn't do the same route sort of exactly as I did, because they did a lot of wiggly wobbly out of. I went straight up the A1 and then went into Scotland to do the 1,000 miles. But because obviously it's not at fuel stations, I had some distributed to Oundle in Northamptonshire. So I went from London to Oundle to a workshop there. And then the motorist in Leeds, and then had some in Edinburgh. And then I met the Scottish Motor Racing Club at Knockhill Circuit and refueled with them, because they use it in their racing cars. Obviously, it was different blends, but I used the classic car one that was suitable for them. And it's that sort of thing. It's like the car ran fine. There was no problems. And, I'm going to be writing articles about it and, just chatting about it in situations like this to sort of say, like, it is doable. We just need the distribution and the price to go down, and so using the car to show that it can be done, it can work, and it's 80% sustainable. So this particular fuel is made from sort of like farm waste, rather than fossil fuel. It's farm waste, so straw and things like that that wouldn't have gone into the food chain, and so it's carbon neutral. And so yes, you're still putting carbon into the atmosphere, but it's captured carbon rather than new carbon.
There's got to be more trade for farmers as well, hasn't it? Based on what you just said there. Which they're desperate for.
Yep, absolutely. So it's looking into things like that. It's like, I've been given a massive privilege to have this car. There's no way I would have been able to afford it myself now, and I want to do something that means something to more than me with it, which is give the sustainable fuel a go. See what it's like, because it may not work out in the end, but I'd like to think it might, because to me it just makes sense. Because you've got like 2 billion cars on the road in the world. Why are we not looking at keeping those going? Why are we building new ones? We don't need new ones. But again, it's a bigger picture than that.
Well, you're sat there in a Victorian house.
Yeah.
Like, obviously there has been a spate of kind of knocking old buildings down, and kind of the war didn't help, but you're sat there in a house and there's absolutely no need to do that. You can go through and kind of modernize that to the point where you can live comfortably. And actually, it was probably built better than the house that was built 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
If you need any mid-century furniture, just let me know, because sort of during my gardening downtime, I've started trading a lot of old furniture.
Have you really?
And I have,
Oh, wow.
And to be honest, it ties in well with what we were saying earlier about, this stuff that was made in the 50s and 60s. It's just as good as new, pretty much. It's still, the build quality is incredible, like chest of drawers. Whereas now, chest of drawers comes out of Argos. It's not going to go beyond where it is now. It might go on to one other home, but chances are it will go into the skip, won't it? Whereas this mid-century stuff, I speak to people that are getting rid of it because their parents have died or grandparents, and they've said, they bought these in the 50s, brand new, sat in this house since 1958 or something. And it's just testament to the build that will just go on and on. But I guess throwaway lifestyle and culture has just come in, and in terms of furniture anyway, it's dominated. It's doing it with cars now as well, isn't it? What we were saying at the start.
It makes me really sad, because it's just, we are so bad at, everything's designed to have a lifespan, like, our iPhones and things like that. They're designed to fail. And don't get me wrong, car build quality hasn't always been the most exceptional, has it? But I just think it does make me quite distressed, actually, to think of how wasteful we are. I was always taught is sort of like, do one thing and do it well, and save up, buy it well, rather than buying 10 pairs of rubbish shoes. Save up and buy one pair of good shoes. Like my gramps, again, he said to me one day, because you're going to work in London at the Times, get yourself a pair of brogues. And I remember the day that I went to, it was a Debenhams at Monument Station, near Monument Station in London. I went to Debenhams, and they've got different fancy shops within the shop. No, it wasn't Debenhams, it was House of Fraser. That was it, House of Fraser, with the shops within the shops. And I went and bought these brown leather brogues with wooden heel, like proper shoes. And I think they're about 75 quid. And I was like, I've never spent this much money before. And it felt like the best thing ever. And I've still got them. My feet must have expanded in my old age, because they don't fit anymore. But I'm going to mount them at some point and put a little plaque on it and say, like, I think it was like 2009 to 2019 Sunday Times with the brogues, because they represent something, because it really meant something. I'd saved up, I'd got the job, I was doing it, and I'd got the brogues that Gramps said I'd be able to buy one day. And as I say, I've still got them. They haven't fallen apart. My feet have just got big. So, and it's stuff like that. I think with cars, there's that sense of achievement. If you really want a car, when you get your first car, there is nothing like that feeling of freedom. And, I know I said that things changed for me when I took on the custodianship of the MG, but I still remember that feeling of independence when I got my driver's license and I got my Ford Fiesta, and I was like, I am on the road. And it was like, I don't have to ask for lifts anymore. I can go to Tesco's on my own. I can go to the cinema. I can go to Southend-on-Sea. Like, immense feeling, you know, and there's nothing like that. And I just hope that there are still, I say, like, young people today, it will sound really like old and stickly and boring, but that still crave that sense of freedom. Because I know you can get Ubers and stuff like that, but when you are sat at that steering wheel and you turn that car on, and there's a level of fear, for me, there was a level of fear when I got in, because you think, I can't screw this up because I can't have an accident and I don't want to have an accident, you know, and so it's quite nerve-wracking to start with. But then once you get into the groove, you're like, yeah, and you put your cassette tape in and you're like, yeah, you know, and you get your pink shiny mats and you're like, yeah, and it's just, it was a proper, my first one, proper Essex. I had white blonde hair. I had a white bomber jacket with faux fur trim. It was a white, what was it, a 1.25... no, it wasn't. It was a Fresco. Elridge Fresco was my first one, and it was like a tub of Flora, you know, the white tub. It was falling apart, but I was proper Essex, and I had my white heels in the passenger seat footwell, so that when I got to places, I'd get out and put those on. It was the best. It was the best, you know. You look back now, and I don't think, what an idiot. It just makes me smile, because at the time I felt like the absolute boss, you know.
Yeah, I guess that affordability is the thing, isn't it? Now with new cars, and well, unless your parents are going to buy you your first car, which yeah, who knows?
You can have a Hot Wheels.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for joining us. I'm going to wrap it up because A, I've got to go back to work. B, I'm going to have to edit it at some point.
I also, sorry, I do have a tendency to waffle and go off on tangents, so I hope
it's absolutely. No, it's been brilliant. It's been a really good chat, and I've enjoyed obviously hearing the stuff about your grandfather's cars, but equally your insight into kind of what we can do for the future to help kind of the next generation is really interesting. And that's kind of a topic that we've sort of discussed a number of times on the podcast. So really interesting. Yeah, really appreciate you coming on. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Charlotte.
No, thank you. And sorry if I've waffled and gone off on tangents. Hopefully it's editable.
No, it was lovely. It was great.
No, we'll keep in touch. Just generally, just keep in touch. And hopefully we can meet in 3D at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take care.
See you later.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, that was really good. I really enjoyed that one, John.
Yeah, absolutely. It was there's some touching subjects in there, weren't there? Particularly with the Ford Escort and Charlotte's grandfather.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of, I guess it was a haven, wasn't it? A sort of a safe place after school. And regardless of the fact that actually it wasn't an expensive car or anything kind of particularly fancy, it just meant a lot to her because of obviously the association with her grandfather, and also just the fact it represented that safety and sort of comfort and security. Yeah.
I think the car can be like that for a lot of people, a bit of a safe space. I always sort of remember when I was early into driving, you sort of venture out into a shopping centre or something like that. And then I'd sort of get there, walk around the shops and think, I'm actually really not enjoying this. And as soon as I get back in the car, I'd be quite content and just sort of, I guess it was all about the journey really. But that was in a day when you could just go out and drive just for the love of it because it was affordable.
I was going to say you didn't need a second mortgage for a trip out.
Yeah.
But that was really nice. Yeah, obviously her grandfather meant a lot to her. And then later on, obviously we got onto her grandfather on the other side with the MG, and how she ended up kind of inheriting that, and that sort of sparked this whole sort of love of automotive. She kind of got it clicked.
Yeah.
And been on kind of some road trips, being able to write about that, and that's obviously sort of branched her career out into the automotive space.
Yeah, some massive road trips.
Yeah, amazing just to kind of have that, and also just sort of continue literally the journey of that vehicle kind of with a new generation of the family, which I think that's really nice. That I like the fact when you drive an old car that you think, especially if you listen to sort of radio stations like Capital or whatever, where they play the old music, you kind of think, actually, once upon a time, someone else was driving down a road, not necessarily this road, but listening to this exact song in this car. And all of a sudden you just sort of jumped back into that just for a second.
Yeah.
And kind of similar for her, I suppose. There'll be moments which will have crossed over she would have driven that car to a petrol station, potentially the same one that he would have gone to, or down the same road, or listened to a similar piece of music or something. And yeah, it kind of continues, regardless of the fact, obviously, her grandfather's passed on. So
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? That it can keep the legacy alive.
yeah, definitely. So yeah, a big thanks to Charlotte, really, for joining us and sharing those stories with us. Obviously, people may or may not be aware. We don't tend to kind of do a pre-record or anything with these. We have sort of a minimal amount of interaction over email or say DM on social media, just to kind of hear people out a little bit. But we're hearing these stories for the first time when we're recording, so
Yeah.
it is nice just to kind of hear those unfold, and we're kind of thinking on the fly and trying to work out what the next question is and all of that. There's a lot of podcasts out there who've got researchers and the rest.
Yeah.
We're not that.
No. Well, it's like you say, it's nice that the spontaneity of some of the stories that have come up from guests, but also it's probably a case of they might not have even spoken about this before ever, some of it, or for a very long time at the least. So yeah, it's nice to watch people sort of well, the cogs start turning, don't they? And you can see sort of one memory might trigger another, and so on.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's nice to be able to offer that service, so to speak, and just facilitate that, and then hopefully it's something that they go back to their houses or whatever, and kind of think about, chat over with partners, friends, relatives, and kind of sparks a whole new conversation.
Yeah. Even you think whoever we have on, they, like you say, speak to a family or friend, and then that person ends up doing the same sort of thing in their head, don't they? Or they reach out to us and say, I could be quite good on this podcast too.
Definitely. So yeah, thank you very much, Charlotte. Yeah, it was great to hear from her, and thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Cool. We'll wrap it up. Roll the credits.
Thank you for listening to my dad's car. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please support us. Buy us a coffee and subscribe. And tell all your friends.